The Science of Meditation. Chapter 8. Wisdom of the East. If someone were to say, the wisdom of the East comes from meditation, you might just laugh it off. However, if that statement is changed to, most Eastern sages are masters of meditation, you would think that sounds reasonable. For example, Buddha studied meditation under several Indian yoga masters for 6 years. But then one day, after continuously meditating under a Bodhi tree for 7 days and 7 nights, he suddenly achieved enlightenment and entered nirvana, which was the beginning of Buddhism. Later, Buddhism was introduced to China, took root and flourished there, and gave rise to 10 different sections. Although some of these sects had unique methods of practicing Buddhism, such as the Pure Land schools, Nianfo, and the Chan, or Zen, schools, Huatu, most of them still practice Buddhism using the traditional method of sitting meditation. In particular, the silent illumination Zen method advocated by the Chaodong school was summarized by Dogen Zenji in Japan with the phrase, just sitting, which can be said to reveal the secret of practicing Buddhism. Just sitting has also become one of the characteristics of the Japanese Chaodong school. As for China's indigenous culture, I have already discussed the origin and development of effortlessness in great detail in Chapter 2, Doing Nothing. In short, meditation may be the only human activity that can be achieved by doing nothing. Conversely, it is most likely that the ancient sages derived that counterintuitive idea from meditation and applied it to other fields, such as everyday life and politics. However, is there any concrete evidence to show that those sages truly achieved enlightenment through meditation? The ancient Chinese referred to meditation as Zhuo Wang, or Xin-Zhai. Literally, Zhuo Wang means sitting forgetting, and Xin-Zhai means mind fasting. In the book Xuanzi, there is a dialogue between Confucius and his disciple Yan Hui. Yan Hui said, "I have achieved Zhuo Wang." Confucius asked, "What is Zhuo Wang?" Yan Hui replied, "I have paralyzed my limbs, shut off my senses, made my torso disappear, abandoned my intellect, and merged with the universe. That is Zhuo Wang." Confucius said, "When everything becomes one, distinctions between good and bad disappear, and one can let go of permanent attachments. You have truly become a wise person. I want to follow in your footsteps." According to the above descriptions of Zhuo Wang, we can clearly see that the ancient sages not only achieved enlightenment through meditation, but also reached a very deep level of awake sleep. Perhaps, paralysis of the limbs, and closing of the senses, can be understood by beginners who have practiced meditation for 1,000 hours or more, but disappearance of the body, cessation of thought, or abundance of intellect require more time and patience. These phenomena only occur when the body enters a deeper sleep state, and the sensory nerves and motor nerves are completely shut down. When the body disappears, you lose the sense of space. When thought stops, you lose the sense of time. When both of them happen, you experience a wonderful feeling of transcending time and space, as if merging with the universe. As for what kind of philosophical reflections and religious perceptions can arise in that unity of heaven and humanity, for example, Taoist effortlessness and purity, Buddhist impermanence and selflessness, Confucian benevolence and righteousness, etc., they vary from person to person and are beyond the scope of this book. However, as Confucius said, when everything becomes one, distinctions between good and bad disappear. Thus, I believe that most of those philosophical and religious reflections and perceptions do not fundamentally contradict each other. Even when some of them appear to be in conflict, there is nothing right or wrong, deep or shallow, about them. In modern times, with the spread of Western culture to the East, Western thought and Eastern wisdom collided between two Easterners. One was Hu Shi, an important figure in modern Chinese intellectual and academic history. Hu's academic interests were extremely wide-ranging, including the Zen culture of Buddhism. His contributions to the study of Zen Buddhism focused on two aspects: a rigorous examination of Zen Buddhism's history, and the sorting and summarizing of Zen Buddhist thought. The other important figure was T. Suzuki, a Japanese cultural communicator who brought Zen to the West. Due to his promotion of Zen studies, the Western world began to take an interest in Buddhism, which also stimulated a renewed interest in Buddhism among Easterners. Suzuki's greatest contribution to Zen studies was editing and translating Zen Buddhist works and, in his own works, linking Zen to science and mysticism, thus arousing a widespread interest in Zen studies in the Western world, where he is known as the Zen master of the world. In the 20th century, both Hu and Suzuki were renowned masters in Zen literature and philosophy, and corresponded with each other. However, in later years, they had a dispute. The reason was that, based on Hu's research, he discovered a lot of falsification in the history of Zen. 90% or even 95% of Zen, Hu said, is nonsense, forgery, fraud, embellishment, and pretension. These words may be harsh, but they are my honest opinion. In response to Hu's criticism, Suzuki argued that Hu was merely an historian and could only understand Zen from an historical background, knowing nothing about Zen itself. Suzuki emphasized that an historian of Zen must first have an inner appreciation of Zen's spirit before making an objective analysis of Zen's history. Although Hu knows a lot about history, he said, he knows nothing about the actors behind history, so his study of Zen history is just a pile of fragments after history is dismantled. In this long-standing debate, Hu believed that it was all about the difference between religious faith and scientific methods. In a letter to a friend in his later years, he explained, most Japanese scholars are followers who use modern scientific methods to study, of course, with limitations and incompleteness. For example, my old friend D.T. Suzuki can criticize Pure Land Buddhism, but he cannot accept my view on the fake history of Zen. On the other hand, Suzuki always believed that Hu had never participated in Zen, so he didn't understand it, because the life of Zen begins with enlightenment. Suzuki also believed that, in the history of Zen, there must be some necessity of weaving imagination and fact together. In addition, enlightenment can be explained as a kind of intuitive insight into the nature of things, which is completely opposite to analysis or logical understanding. Suzuki also believed that Zen is an actual, personal experience, not knowledge that can be obtained through analytical or comparative methods. From this debate, it can be seen that rather than a clash between Hu and Suzuki, there was a clash between Western and Eastern thought. Hu, representing Western thought, followed reason and logic, analysis and comparison. His principle can be simply summarized in 4 words: show me the evidence. On the other hand, Suzuki defended Eastern wisdom, which follows intuition and experience, imagination and inspiration. To him, Zen was a kind of wisdom and a way to liberate the intellect. Leaving some things unsaid has great significance in obtaining Eastern wisdom. Suzuki criticized Hu for not understanding Zen, which essentially means that Hu had no experience with meditation. On the other hand, Hu criticized Japanese scholars as mere followers, which essentially means that although they had insights from their experience of meditation, they did not truly understand the biological nature of those experiences. Therefore, they overestimated the mystery and sacredness of those experiences and were unable or unwilling to separate imaginary elements from facts. Conversely, if Hu had had some experience with meditation, his views on Zen and Zen history might be significantly different. On the other hand, if Suzuki had had a better understanding of the biological nature of meditation, he could have faced the falsification of Zen history more calmly and directly. In fact, human understanding of the external world primarily occurs through 2 pathways: sensory experience and logical reasoning. For example, the recognition of colors is a form of visual experience, while the discovery of mathematical and physical laws belongs to logical reasoning. The main difference between these 2 pathways lies in their relationship to language. Logical reasoning is relatively easy to analyze and articulate step by step by using language and text, whereas sensory experience, although expressible through language, requires shared experiences to enable effective communication. For instance, describing the colorful world to someone with normal vision is not difficult, but explaining the concept of red or green to a person born blind is nearly impossible. The reason for this is not hard to understand. Language does not exist naturally, it is a product of collective consensus within human society. In other words, the formation of language depends on prior experiences. For example, the Eskimos, who have lived in snowy environments for generations, possess dozens of words for describing snow, whereas the detailed naming of cooking techniques in Chinese stems from the cultural emphasis on food in Chinese society. That demonstrates that for any human experience to be transformed into language, it must be rooted in collective experience and expressed through shared symbols. As we have seen, meditation is not a form of knowledge acquired through analysis or logical reasoning, it is a deeply personal, not collective, experience. Throughout history, only a few individuals have had the time and dedication to devote thousands of hours to meditation. Even among them, subtle differences arose in how they perceived and described the experience. This led to a profound expressive dilemma. They lacked the experiential language to convey the sensations of deep meditation and were unable to create a shared vocabulary to articulate them, much like a sighted person trying to explain the color green or red to someone blind from birth. Moreover, Western thought emphasizes rationality, while Eastern wisdom leans toward intuition and sensibility. That explains why Eastern classics, such as the Tao Te Ching and the Diamond Sutra, are often harder to comprehend and seem profoundly mysterious, compared to, for example, the writings of Plato and Aristotle. In reality, the texts left by Eastern sages after their meditative enlightenment at best describe the state of enlightenment, but not the essence of the Tao or the Dharma. That is because common language cannot be used to describe transcendent experiences, although people often try by using metaphors and other analogies. That is why Zen masters emphasize that Zen cannot be grasped through words. It can only be understood through direct, non-verbal experience, most notably through meditation. Laozi opens the Tao Te Ching by stating, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, the name that can be named is not the eternal name." That means that any truth that can be expressed in words is not an eternal truth, and any named entity is not an eternal entity. Returning to the earlier example, one can teach a person born blind mathematics or physics through language, but it is impossible to convey what color is through words. Only when blind individuals gain sight through some extraordinary means can they truly perceive what color is. Hegel once said, "The history of philosophy is philosophy itself," and perhaps we can say, the way of attaining Eastern wisdom is wisdom itself. That is because the way to attain Eastern wisdom is to meditate, and without the experience of meditation, it is difficult to truly understand Eastern thought and wisdom, at least, to understand their origins and context. That is also why Hegel said, Eastern thought must be excluded from the history of philosophy, because he did not know the origins or comprehend the context of Eastern wisdom. In fact, that origin is not obscure or mystical, because it is Zhuo Wang, it is Xin Zhai, it is awake sleep, it is just sitting.